The final bell at Franklin High School usually meant freedom for the students and teachers alike. For Grace Mitchell, it meant grading papers, planning tomorrow's lessons, and heading home to her husband Jack, a decorated Marine Scout sniper turned civilian instructor. But today, that routine would be shattered forever. When Grace noticed two men watching her in the parking lot, her first thought was to call Jack. Her second thought never came. A gloved hand muffled her scream as she was dragged into a waiting van. Viktor Dragovich's men had been ordered to kidnap someone connected to a rival crime family. Instead, they grabbed a high school English teacher. As Grace fought back with unexpected calm, memorizing details just as Jack had taught her, her captors didn't realize their mistake. They thought they were dealing with a simple teacher who would break easily. They had no idea that the quiet woman they'd snatched was married to Staff Sergeant Jack Mitchell, the Marine Corps' deadliest sniper, with over 50 confirmed kills and a dark past that was about to catch up with everyone involved. Some people learn too late that when you take a Marine's wife, you don't just get the woman, you get the warrior. And Jack Mitchell was about to remind the criminal underworld why he'd earned his reputation one bullet at a time. The final bell echoed through the empty corridors of Franklin High School. Grace Mitchell gathered her papers, smoothing back a strand of honey-brown hair that had escaped her neat bun. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through her classroom windows, painting golden stripes across 30 vacant desks. "Mrs. Mitchell?" A tentative voice drew her attention to the door. Jenny Torres, one of her sophomore students, lingered in the doorway. "Everything okay, Jenny?" Grace smiled warmly, setting down the stack of English essays she'd been organizing. "I just wanted to say thanks for believing in me." Jenny clutched her latest essay to her chest, the red visible at the top. "Nobody else thought I could write." Grace's heart warmed. "You did all the hard work. I just helped you see what was already there." After Jenny left, Grace checked her phone. A text from Jack made her smile. "Don't forget dinner with Mom tonight. Love you." She'd been so caught up in grading papers, she'd almost forgotten about their weekly dinner plans with Jack's mother. Outside in the teacher's parking lot, the October wind carried the scent of fallen leaves. Grace pulled her cardigan closer, fishing for her car keys in her leather tote bag. The lot was nearly empty now, just a few cars scattered across the asphalt expanse. Hidden behind a maintenance van, two men watched her progress. "That's her." The shorter one, Marco, squinted through cigarette smoke. "You sure, Nikolai?" Nikolai adjusted his leather gloves. "Boss says she's connected to the Calabrese family. Some kind of courier or accountant. Doesn't matter. We grab her, bring her in, let the boss sort it out." "Seems too normal," Marco muttered. "Teaching high school English. Perfect cover, isn't it?" Nikolai's cold eyes tracked Grace's movement. "Besides, you want to tell Dragovich you had doubts about his intel?" Marco shuddered. He'd seen what happened to people who questioned Viktor Dragovich's judgment. "Let's do it." Grace had just reached her blue Honda Civic when she heard footsteps behind her. Before she could turn, strong arms grabbed her from behind. She tried to scream, but a gloved hand clamped over her mouth. The smell of leather and cigarettes filled her nostrils. "Don't fight," a heavily accented voice whispered. "Nice and quiet." Grace's teacher bag hit the ground, papers spilling across the asphalt. Her legs kicked out instinctively, but her attacker was too strong. Through her terror, Jack's voice echoed in her mind from one of their conversations about self-defense. "If you're ever in danger, stay calm. Observe everything. Details save lives." The van side door slid open with a metallic screech. Grace found herself shoved inside, landing hard on the metal floor. The door slammed shut, plunging her into semi-darkness. The vehicle lurched forward, tires squealing on asphalt. Instead of giving in to panic, Grace forced herself to focus. The van smelled of cigarettes and motor oil. Two men in the back with her, two more in the front. The driver took a sharp right turn. She was counting, keeping track of their route. Left, right, straight for what felt like 10 minutes, then onto what must be the highway from the smooth acceleration. "Check her phone," Nikolai ordered. Marco grabbed Grace's purse, dumping its contents. "Grace Mitchell," he read from her driver's license. "Lives on Cedar Grove Lane. Teacher at Franklin High." He scrolled through her phone. "Lots of pictures with some guy. Looks military. Husband?" "Yeah, Jack Mitchell. Marine, looks like." Nikolai frowned. "Wait, Mitchell? Boss said we were looking for someone named Romano, connected to the Calabrese family. We grabbed the wrong woman? Marco's voice rose with panic. Shut up, Nikolai backhanded him. Boss will decide what to do. He turned to Grace, studying her with cold eyes. Looks like it's your lucky day, Mrs. Mitchell. You get to be our guest for a while. Grace's mind raced. They'd meant to kidnap someone else, someone connected to organized crime. That meant these men were... Her blood ran cold. Mafia. She was being kidnapped by the Mafia. The van drove for another 30 minutes before stopping. Grace was blindfolded and led through what felt like a parking garage, then up several flights of stairs. When the blindfold was removed, she found herself in a luxuriously appointed office. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the city skyline, now painted in sunset colors. Behind an imposing desk sat a man in his 50s, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit. His silver hair was perfectly styled, but his eyes were as cold as Arctic ice. He studied a tablet, not acknowledging Grace's presence for several long minutes. Finally, he looked up. Mrs. Mitchell, I apologize for the inconvenience. I am Viktor Dragovich. It seems my men made a mistake. Grace squared her shoulders, channeling every ounce of authority she used to control rowdy teenagers. Mr. Dragovich, I don't know who you think I am, but who you are, Dragovich cut her off smoothly, is now irrelevant. What matters is who you will become, an asset. He smiled, but it never reached his eyes. You see, Mrs. Mitchell, in my line of work, there are no mistakes, only opportunities. And you, my dear, have become a very interesting opportunity. My husband will look for me, Grace said firmly. Ah yes, your Marine husband. Dragovich's smile widened fractionally. I'm counting on it. You see, recent events have made me curious about certain government operations in my territory. Perhaps your husband can help satisfy my curiosity. Jack won't. Mrs. Mitchell. Dragovich's voice turned to ice. Let me be clear. Your continued well-being depends entirely on your cooperation. I suggest you accept your role in this situation with Grace. If you'll pardon the pun. Grace fell silent, her mind working furiously. Jack had trained her for dangerous situations, made her memorize protocols and procedures. Stay alive, he'd always said. Whatever happens, stay alive. I'll find you. Meanwhile, across town, Jack Mitchell paced in their kitchen. The wall clock showed 7:45 p.m. His mother had already called twice, wondering where they were for dinner. Grace's phone went straight to voicemail. Pick up, sweetheart, he muttered, trying her number again. Come on. He'd already called the school. No answer at this hour. He tried Sarah, Grace's best friend. Sorry, Jack, haven't heard from her since lunch, Sarah said. She mentioned grading papers after school. Maybe she lost track of time. Not Grace. Not as Grace. She was too organized, too considerate to disappear without a word. The house phone rang, an unknown number. Jack grabbed it. Grace? Mr. Mitchell. The voice was male, heavily accented. Your wife is safe? For now. Jack's military training kicked in instantly. He kept his voice steady, hitting the record button on his phone. Who is this? Someone who has taken a great interest in your lovely wife. And in you, Mr. Mitchell. Or should I say, Staff Sergeant Mitchell? If you've hurt her, she's perfectly fine. Whether she stays that way depends entirely on you. We'll be in touch with instructions. Do try to keep this between us. Involving the authorities would be unfortunate for Mrs. Mitchell. The line went dead. Jack stood frozen, his hand white-knuckled around the phone. Then, with mechanical precision, he walked to their bedroom. Behind the false back of their closet was a safe. Inside lay the tools of his former trade: weapons, tactical gear, burner phones. Equipment he'd hoped never to need again. I'm coming, Grace, he whispered. Hold on. In a sparse room several stories above Dragovich's office, Grace sat on a narrow bed, her teacher's mind cataloging every detail. One small window barred, door reinforced steel. No phones or electronics. 2 guards outside. She could hear them talking softly in what sounded like Russian. Through the thin walls, voices drifted from the adjacent room. She pressed her ear to the wall, straining to hear. Once we have what we need from the Marine, a voice was saying, the teacher becomes a liability. Boss wants it clean. No traces. Understood? 1 bullet, Problem solved. Grace's heart hammered, but her resolve hardened. She wasn't just some helpless victim. She was Grace Mitchell, teacher, wife of a Marine, and survivor. They thought she was just a bargaining chip, a means to an end. They were wrong. She returned to the bed, mind already working on plans. Jack would be looking for her. She knew that with absolute certainty. Her job was to stay alive and help him however she could. These men had made a terrible mistake, not in kidnapping the wrong woman, but in underestimating her. Grace closed her eyes, remembering Jack's training. Survival isn't just about strength, he'd told her. It's about patience, observation, and seizing the right moment. Her moment would come, and when it did, Viktor Dragovich would learn that he hadn't just kidnapped a teacher. He'd stolen a Marine's wife. And that was going to be the biggest mistake of his life. The fluorescent lights of the police station buzzed overhead as Jack Mitchell sat across from Detective Peterson, his fingers drumming restlessly on the worn desk. The detective barely glanced at the photos of Grace spread across his desk, his expression one of practiced indifference. "Mr. Mitchell," Peterson sighed, leaning back in his creaking chair, "I understand you're worried, but adults go missing all the time. Usually shows up at a friend's house, sleeping off a bad day." Jack's jaw tightened. "My wife was kidnapped. I received a ransom call, which you conveniently recorded." Peterson's tone dripped with skepticism. "Look, we'll file the report, but without concrete evidence." "Evidence?" Jack's voice remained eerily calm, though his green eyes had turned to steel. "Her car's still in the school parking lot. Her phone's offline. Our dinner plans with my mother missed. Grace doesn't just disappear." Detective Peterson shuffled some papers, not meeting Jack's gaze. "Could be domestic troubles. Teaching's a stressful job. Maybe she needed space." Jack stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the linoleum floor. At his full height of 6'2", he cast an imposing shadow across Peterson's desk. "File the report. Do your job. Or don't. Either way, I'm finding my wife." The autumn wind whipped through the school parking lot as Jack approached Grace's abandoned Honda Civic. The school's security cameras had conveniently malfunctioned yesterday. Too convenient. Professional job. He pulled on latex gloves, a habit from his military days. The car's door handle was clean, too clean. Someone had wiped it. Amateur move. A clean handle on a dusty car stood out more than fingerprints would have. Inside, Jack's trained eyes caught details others would miss. Scuff marks on the passenger door frame. Someone had leaned in, probably to grab her belongings. A tiny fiber caught in the door seal. Black wool. Expensive. Not from Grace's clothing. Her teacher's bag lay scattered nearby, paper strewn across the asphalt. Jack photographed everything before collecting the evidence in plastic bags. One paper caught his attention, a student's essay with a fresh footprint. Italian leather, size 11. Not standard kidnapper wear. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. Sergeant Mitchell. A gruff voice he recognized from his Marine days. "Heard you're asking questions downtown. Rodriguez. Didn't know you were still working Vice." "Listen, Jack. Word is you're poking around something big. Meet me at O'Malley's. 1 hour. Back door." O'Malley's was a dive bar in the industrial district, the kind of place where questions weren't asked and faces were quickly forgotten. Jack entered through the back alley, the smell of stale beer and cigarettes hitting him as he stepped inside. Rodriguez sat in a dark corner, nursing a whiskey. He'd aged since Jack had last seen him. More gray in his beard, more lines around his eyes. 20 years of undercover work did that to a man. "You look like shit, Rod. Feel worse?" Rodriguez gestured to the empty chair. "Your wife's disappearance. It's connected to something ugly. Word on the street is Viktor Dragovich's crew grabbed her." The name hit Jack like a physical blow. Memories flooded back. A mission in Kosovo, 6 years ago. The rain fell in icy sheets as Jack lay prone on the muddy hillside, his sniper rifle trained on the compound below. Through his scope, he watched armed men loading crates into trucks. Intel said it was a human trafficking operation, but something felt off. "Sierra 1, you have eyes on the target?" Captain Harris's voice crackled through his earpiece. "Negative, sir. Something's wrong. Pattern's different from Intel. Stick to the mission, Mitchell. Take the shot when you have it." Jack's instinct screamed. The men below moved with military precision, not like typical traffickers. "Sir, requesting hold on." "Take the shot, Sergeant." "That's an order." Jack squeezed the trigger. His target dropped. Then all hell broke loose. Not traffickers, arms dealers. The compound erupted in automatic fire. 3 good men died that day because command wouldn't listen to his instincts. "Mitchell? You still with me?" Rodriguez's voice snapped Jack back to the present. "What's Dragovich's angle? Why Grace?" Rodriguez leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Viktor Dragovich runs the most sophisticated criminal enterprise on the East Coast. Arms dealing, money laundering, you name it. But he's careful, professional, never leaves evidence. Until now." Jack pulled out his phone, showing Rodriguez the photos from Grace's car. "They got sloppy." "No." Rodriguez shook his head. "Dragovich's people don't get sloppy. This was deliberate. They wanted you to know." Jack's blood ran cold. "Why?" "That's what scares me. Dragovich doesn't make random moves. Everything's calculated. Word is he's planning something big. Weapons deal, heavy artillery, military-grade stuff. And Grace? How does she fit in?" Rodriguez downed his whiskey. "Leverage, maybe. Or bait. Watch your back, Jack. Dragovich has eyes everywhere." Jack spent the next 3 days building his intel network. He called in favors from old Marine contacts, working his way through the city's underground. Every lead, every whisper pointed to Dragovich. The man was a ghost, former Russian military, turned crime boss. His organization was a machine of brutal efficiency. In a rundown motel room that served as his temporary base, Jack pieced together the puzzle. Maps covered one wall, surveillance photos another. String-connected locations, faces, events. At the center, Viktor Dragovich's empire. His burner phone buzzed. Another contact. "Mitchell." The voice was barely a whisper. "Loading dock 27 midnight. Weapons shipment. Big one." Dragovich's personal oversight. Jack checked his watch. 10 p.m. Time to gear up. The hidden compartment in his truck contained everything he needed. Body armor, combat knife, night vision gear, his old M40A5 sniper rifle, meticulously maintained. Each piece held memories of missions, of brothers lost. As he checked his equipment, another call came through. Video message. Unknown sender. His hands shook slightly as he pressed play. Grace appeared on screen, seated in a bare room. She looked tired but unharmed. Her voice was steady, controlled. "Jack, they want me to tell you to back off. To stop investigating." A pause. Her eyes met the camera. "Remember what you taught me about survival. About patience." The camera shifted to show Viktor Dragovich, immaculate in his suit. "Sergeant Mitchell, your wife is quite remarkable. Strong spirit. It would be a shame to break it. You have 24 hours to cease your activities. After that," he smiled coldly. "Well, let's hope it doesn't come to that." The video ended. Jack sat motionless, his mind processing every detail. Grace's subtle hints, her controlled breathing. She was telling him she was keeping track of time, locations. His clever, brave Grace. Dragovich's face filled his mind. The man was used to power, to control. He expected Jack to behave like a desperate husband, making mistakes in his panic to save his wife. Big mistake. Jack wasn't just a husband. He was a Marine Scout sniper with over 50 confirmed kills. He'd outthought and outmaneuvered the deadliest enemies across 3 continents. And now, Dragovich had given him something invaluable. Confirmation that Grace was alive, and a glimpse of her location. The warehouse windows showed a distinctive skyline view. Combined with the loading dock intel, Jack could triangulate the likely area. Dragovich was moving weapons tonight, which meant he'd be exposed. Jack began his preparations with mechanical precision. Each magazine checked and loaded, each piece of gear tested. He'd learned long ago that battles were won in the preparation. At his laptop, he dug deeper into Dragovich's operation. The weapons shipment wasn't just guns. These were next-generation prototype weapons. Military classified. The kind of hardware that could start wars. Grace had stumbled into something much bigger than a simple kidnapping. Dragovich was playing a dangerous game, using her as insurance against interference. The crime boss's arrogance would be his downfall. He thought he was dealing with a simple Marine, someone who could be threatened or bought off. He had no idea that he'd awakened something far more dangerous, a man with nothing left to lose, and the skills to tear an empire apart. Jack stood at the window, watching the city lights below. Somewhere out there, Grace was waiting, counting on him. His wife, his heart, his reason for leaving the violence of war behind. But now, war had come to him. He lifted his sniper rifle, the familiar weight comforting in his hands. Tonight, he would send Dragovich a message. A simple lesson that every Marine learned in basic training. Never underestimate your enemy. I'm coming for you, he whispered, his voice hard as granite. And when I'm done, there won't be enough of your empire left to fill a matchbox. The night stretched before him, full of deadly promise. In the distance, thunder rolled, nature's drums of war. Jack Mitchell, the Marine Corps' deadliest sniper, was going hunting. And Viktor Dragovich was about to learn why you never take a Marine's wife. In her cell, Grace felt the change in the air. Guards rushed past her door, voices urgent in Russian. She smiled slightly, knowing without doubt that Jack was coming. Not rushing in blindly, but moving with the deadly precision she'd glimpsed in him during their years together. Dragovich had kidnapped a teacher, thinking he'd found a useful pawn. Instead, he'd set in motion his own destruction. Because Grace wasn't just any teacher, and Jack wasn't just any Marine. They were about to become Dragovich's worst nightmare. The Red Dragon nightclub pulsed with heavy bass beats that vibrated through the concrete walls. Jack Mitchell adjusted his leather jacket, studying his reflection in a puddle of rainwater. 3 days of stubble and dark circles under his eyes completed his cover as a down-on-his-luck veteran looking for work. The bouncer, 6'4" of tattooed muscle, gave him a cursory pat-down before nodding him through. Inside, the club was a maze of shadows and strobing lights, the air thick with cigarette smoke and desperation. Perfect hunting ground for Dragovich's recruiters. Jack made his way to the bar, ordering vodka he wouldn't drink. His eyes swept the room, cataloging faces, exits, potential threats. 3 men by the VIP section caught his attention. The way they carried themselves, the subtle bulge of shoulder holsters under cheap suits. Dragovich's men. Looking for work? The bartender's voice was barely audible over the music. Early 30s, scarred knuckles, fighter's nose. You got that look? Jack let exhaustion show in his voice. That obvious? Military? The bartender wiped a glass, studying Jack's posture. Marines. Not that it means much these days. The bartender nodded toward a mountain of a man holding court in the VIP section. Boris might have something. Fair warning. He likes to test new guys. Boris turned out to be 6'6" of Russian muscle, with hands like sledgehammers and a face that had seen too many fights. He looked Jack up and down with piggy eyes. Marine? Boris's accent was thick. Many soldiers come looking for work. Most too soft. A crowd was gathering, sensing entertainment. Jack kept his stance loose, non-threatening. Just looking to pay bills. Show me. Boris stood, cracking his knuckles. You win, we talk business. You lose. He shrugged massive shoulders. The crowd formed a ring as Boris shed his jacket. Jack noticed one of the suited men filming with his phone. Of course, they recorded these fights, studied potential recruits. Boris threw the first punch, a haymaker that would have taken Jack's head off if it landed. Jack slipped it easily, years of combat training taking over. He didn't counterattack, not yet. Let them see the tired veteran, barely staying ahead of the bigger man. Come on, little Marine. Boris taunted, throwing combinations that looked powerful but telegraphed every move. Jack stumbled, apparently tired. Boris pressed his advantage, backing Jack toward the wall. The crowd jeered, expecting a quick finish. That's when Jack moved. A precise strike to Boris's kidney doubled him over. An elbow to the jaw snapped his head back. Before anyone could blink, Boris was on his knees, Jack's forearm locked around his throat in a textbook blood choke. Enough! One of the suited men stepped forward, mid-40s, gray at his temples. Let him go. Jack released Boris, who slumped gasping to the floor. The suited man smiled, extending his hand. Impressive. I'm Anton Petrov, manager of this establishment. Perhaps we can discuss opportunities? In Petrov's office, Jack played the role of a desperate veteran perfectly. He kept his story simple, closer to truth made lies easier to maintain. Former Marine Scout sniper, struggling to adjust to civilian life, looking for work that used his skills. We always need good men, Petrov said, pouring drinks, especially with military experience. But you understand, we must be careful. Background checks take time. Of course. Jack accepted the drink, pretending to sip. I'm not looking to rush anything. Come back tomorrow night. We'll start you on something simple. Security detail. Petrov wrote an address on a card. Don't be late. In the parking lot, Jack planted a magnetic tracker under Petrov's BMW while pretending to tie his shoe. Phase 1 complete, foot in the door. The next 3 days were a blur of routine security work. Jack guarded card games, watched doors, drove cars, all while gathering intel, mapping Dragovich's operation. He learned the organization's structure, its rhythms. Petrov answered to someone named Yuri, who reported directly to Dragovich. Meanwhile, Grace remained secure in a safe house across town. Her cell was comfortable enough. Dragovich believed in keeping valuable assets content. But the guards had doubled, and she rarely left the room now. Only one guard treated her with any kindness. Nico was younger than the others, maybe 25, with kind eyes that didn't match his profession. He brought her books, extra blankets, and sometimes talked. You shouldn't be here, he said one evening, bringing her dinner. This isn't right. Grace set down her book, a worn copy of The Count of Monte Cristo that felt oddly appropriate. Why do you stay with them, Nico? He shrugged, not meeting her eyes. Family business. My father worked for Mr. Dragovich. Now I do. Simple. Nothing simple about this. Grace gestured at her gilded cage. You know that? Nico glanced nervously at the door. Be careful, Mrs. Mitchell. Things are changing. Mr. Dragovich is worried. Someone's been asking questions, causing problems. Grace kept her expression neutral, but her heart leaped. Jack was coming. The boss, Nico continued, voice barely a whisper. He's using you. Bait for something bigger than just your husband. There are other players involved. Dangerous people. Before he could explain further, heavy footsteps approached. Nico quickly left, leaving Grace to ponder his warning. Across town, Jack's tracker showed Petrov's BMW, heading toward the industrial district. He followed at a safe distance, using back streets he'd memorized. The car stopped at a warehouse near the river, one Jack had noted in his reconnaissance. Using his marine training, Jack scaled a neighboring building, setting up an observation post. Through his scope, he watched Petrov meet with 3 men in expensive suits. Even at this distance, their body language screamed government officials. A shipping container was opened, revealing crates of military hardware. Jack photographed everything with a long-range lens. Serial numbers, faces, license plates. One official examined papers, nodding in approval. Enjoying the show? A woman's voice behind him. Before Jack could turn, he felt the press of a gun barrel against his skull. Hands where I can see them, the voice commanded. Slowly. Jack complied, mind racing. How had someone gotten the drop on him? The voice was American, trained. Not Dragovich's people. The gun shifted slightly, a rookie mistake. Jack exploded into motion, spinning away from the barrel. A shot cracked past his ear as he rolled behind a ventilation unit. More shots, precise, professional. This was no amateur. Jack drew his sidearm, returning fire to cover his movement. He needed distance, better position. A flash of movement. A figure in black tactical gear, moving with military precision. Jack caught a glimpse of familiar equipment. Government issue. Who the hell was this? The sniper was good, forcing Jack toward the building's edge. Each shot came closer, hurting him like a sheep. Time to disappear. Jack rolled off the roof, catching a drain pipe. The climb down was fast, dangerous. More shots sparked off brick around him. He hit the ground running, using parked cars as cover. In the shadows of an alley, Jack finally stopped, breathing hard. That sniper. The gear, the tactics. It all pointed to one conclusion. Someone else was watching Dragovich. Someone with government resources. But why take a shot at him? Unless a new piece of the puzzle clicked into place. This wasn't just about Grace's kidnapping anymore. Dragovich, the weapons, the government officials, the mystery sniper, it was all connected. Grace wasn't just bait for him. She was a pawn in a much bigger game. Back at his motel room, Jack spread out his intel. The weapons in the warehouse were next-generation prototypes, classified technology. The officials taking delivery weren't low-level bureaucrats. Their suits, watches, and bearings screamed intelligence agency. Something bigger was brewing. Dragovich wasn't just another crime boss. He was dealing with people who could make someone disappear without a trace. People who had the resources to send professional snipers after problems. Jack's burner phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Back off while you can. This is bigger than you know. He deleted the message, checking his weapons with mechanical precision. Whoever these players were, whatever game they were playing, they'd made one critical mistake. They'd taken his wife. The next morning, Jack arrived early for his security shift. He needed to get closer to Petrov, earn more trust. The nightclub was quiet at this hour, staff cleaning up from the previous night. A commotion from Petrov's office caught his attention. The door burst open, Boris storming out with a black eye and bloody nose. Problem? Jack asked casually. Boris spat blood. Boss is upset. Someone hit one of our warehouses last night. Took photos of a special delivery. Any leads? Not our problem anymore. Boris lowered his voice. Mr. Dragovich is moving everything. Special cargo, the teacher woman, all of it. Too much heat. Jack's pulse quickened, but his face remained impassive. Need extra hands? Asked Petrov. Boris gestured at the office. He's in a mood, though. Inside, Petrov was throwing back vodka like water. Mitchell. Good. We need reliable men tonight. Big operation. Whatever you need, sir. Petrov studied him through bloodshot eyes. Your former Marine sniper, yes? Good. We may need those skills. Someone's been watching us. Taking photos. This ends tonight? Jack nodded, maintaining his cover. Inside, his mind raced. They were moving Grace. This might be his only chance to find her. But that mystery sniper was still out there. And whoever they worked for, they hadn't missed that second shot by accident. It was a warning. The question was, a warning from whom? And what exactly had Grace stumbled into? One thing was certain. The next few hours would change everything. Jack checked his concealed weapons, mind already formulating plans. Years of Marine training had taught him to adapt, to improvise. Tonight, he'd need every bit of that training, because somewhere in the shadows, a professional killer was watching. And they weren't the only ones with an interest in Viktor Dragovich's operation. The game was getting deadlier. But Jack Mitchell hadn't earned his reputation as the Marines' deadliest sniper by playing it safe. Let them come. All of them, Dragovich, the mystery sniper, whoever else was pulling strings from the shadows. They were about to learn why you never threaten a Marine's family. Because when you do, you don't just get the man. You get the warrior. 7 days of captivity had taught Grace Mitchell more about patience than 15 years of teaching high school students ever could. From her room in Dragovich's compound, she developed an intimate knowledge of the guards' routines, marking time by their footsteps and shift changes. The heavy-set guard, Viktor, always took an extra 5 minutes on his cigarette break at 2 a.m. The night shift supervisor, Alexei, did his rounds clockwise, spending exactly 12 minutes on each floor. And young Nico, with his kind eyes and guilty conscience, always worked the pre-dawn shift alone. Grace sat cross-legged on her bed, appearing to read The Count of Monte Cristo while her mind mapped out timing and trajectories. Jack had trained her for situations like this, though neither had ever expected she'd need those skills. Remember, his voice echoed in her memory from one of their practice sessions. Observation is your strongest weapon. People are creatures of habit. Find the patterns. Find your opportunity. The patterns were clear now. Between 2:15 and 2:30 a.m., when Viktor finished his smoke break, and before Alexei started his rounds, there was a 15-minute window when the southeast corridor was minimally guarded. Only Nico would be there, and he was increasingly troubled by his role in her captivity. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Nico entered with her dinner tray, his usual nervous energy more pronounced than usual. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said, louder than necessary for the benefit of anyone listening. Then, barely a whisper, "Check under the napkin. Be careful." Grace waited until the door closed before investigating. Hidden beneath the paper napkin lay a small metal file, crude but effective, and what appeared to be a ceramic knife barely longer than her palm. Her heart raced. The tools weren't much, but in the right moments, they could mean the difference between captivity and freedom. She carefully concealed both items inside her mattress, mind already adjusting her plans. The lock on her door was simple. She'd studied it during each meal delivery. The file would make quick work of it, but timing would be crucial. That night, Grace barely slept. She lay awake, listening to the symphony of the compound's nighttime routine. Viktor's heavy footsteps at midnight. Alexei's keys jingling at 1 a.m. The distant sound of cars on the highway, tantalizingly close yet so far away. At 2 a.m., right on schedule, Viktor's boots clomped down the corridor for his smoke break. Grace retrieved her tools, hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Years of grading papers under deadline had given her remarkable fine motor control under pressure. The file made a soft scratching sound against the lock mechanism. Grace worked slowly, methodically, pausing whenever footsteps approached. 10 minutes later, she felt the satisfying click of the lock giving way. 2:17 a.m. Right on schedule. Grace eased the door open, wearing the dark clothes Nico had provided over the past week, ostensibly for sleeping. The corridor was dim, emergency lights casting long shadows. She moved silently, keeping to the walls as Jack had taught her. Hug the shadows, his voice guided her. People naturally look at the center of spaces, use their assumptions against them. The first floor was easy. She'd memorized its layout from her trips to Dragovich's office. The second floor was unknown territory. Grace paused at each corner, listening, watching, waiting. Her teacher's instincts for spotting trouble before it happened served her well now. A door stood ajar on her left, warm light spilling into the hallway. Voices drifted out, two men discussing something in rapid Russian. Grace pressed herself against the wall, inching past the opening. Then she saw what was inside the room. Weapons. Not just guns, but military hardware she recognized from Jack's descriptions. Assault rifles, rocket launchers, boxes marked with warning symbols she'd seen in Jack's military manuals. This wasn't just a criminal enterprise. This was something far more dangerous. Grace forced herself to move on. The information was valuable, but escape was paramount. Jack would want her safe first. Intelligence gathering could wait. The southeast corridor stretched before her, leading to a fire escape she'd spotted from her window. 15 more yards to freedom. 10 yards. 5. Going somewhere, Mrs. Mitchell. The voice froze her in her tracks. Ivan Korolov, Dragovich's head of security, a man whose dead eyes and casual cruelty had made even the other guards uncomfortable. He stepped from the shadows, gun trained steadily on her chest. "I'm impressed," Korolov continued, his accent thick with amusement. "You almost made it. But now we have a problem, yes? Mr. Dragovich doesn't like problems." Grace's fingers tightened around the ceramic knife in her pocket. One chance, but Korolov was a professional. He kept his distance, weapon ready. Inside, he gestured with the gun. "Move." They marched back through the corridors, Korolov keeping a careful 2 steps behind. Grace's mind raced, looking for options, but the hunter in Korolov's eyes told her he was hoping she'd try something. Looking for an excuse. Dragovich was waiting in her room, immaculate as always in a tailored suit despite the hour. Nico stood against the wall, face bloody and swollen. 2 guards held him upright. "Mrs. Mitchell." Dragovich's voice was silk over steel. "I'm disappointed. After all our hospitality." He turned to Nico. "In you. I gave you responsibility. Trust. Like your father before you." "Sir," Nico began, but a backhanded strike from Korolov silenced him. "The tools," Dragovich continued. "Where are they?" Grace straightened her spine, channeling every ounce of authority she developed facing down unruly teenagers. "Leave him alone. It was all my idea. I threatened him, manipulated him." "Noble." Dragovich smiled coldly. "But we both know that's not true. Nico has always been soft, like his father. Too much heart." He nodded to Korolov. "Show him what happens to those who betray my trust." What followed made Grace's worst classroom disciplinary incidents look like playground scuffles. Korolov was methodical, professional. Each strike calculated to cause maximum pain with minimum permanent damage. Through it all, Nico never screamed, never begged. His eyes found Grace's, and she read the message there. Worth it. Get free. Tell the truth. Finally, Dragovich raised a hand. Enough. Take him to the basement. Perhaps a few days of reflection will strengthen his resolve. He turned to Grace. As for you, my dear, I'm afraid we need a change of accommodation. Somewhere more secure. Within an hour, Grace found herself being led to a waiting SUV. Through the tinted windows, she caught glimpses of an armed convoy forming up. 3 identical black vehicles, professional security teams, motorcycle escorts. Comfortable, Dragovich settled into the seat across from her. We have a long drive ahead. Perhaps we can discuss your husband's recent activities. Grace's blood ran cold. They knew about Jack's investigation. But Dragovich's smug expression told her something else. He'd wanted Jack to investigate. This was all part of some larger plan. Miles away, Jack crouched in the shadow of an abandoned gas station, watching the pre-dawn traffic through his rifle scope. His contacts had intercepted chatter about a convoy moving a high-value asset. The timing, the security level, it had to be Grace. The convoy would have to pass this point, the only viable route given their likely destination. He'd prepared the area carefully. Caltrops hidden under leaves would shred their tires. Coordinated explosives would separate the target vehicle from its escorts. Quick, clean, professional. The first motorcycle appeared around the bend. Jack's finger tightened on the trigger. Wait for it, wait. The explosion lit up the pre-dawn sky. Tires squealed as the lead SUV swerved into Jack's prepared trap. Guards spilled out, professional but unprepared for the precision of a Marine sniper's fire. One shot, one kill. Marine Corps mantra made reality. For guards down, the second SUV burst into reverse, trying to escape. Jack's next shot took out the driver. The vehicle crashed into the guardrail. He was moving before the echo of the shot faded, sprinting toward the disabled vehicles. The rear SUV was turning, trying to escape. No time for careful shots now. Jack triggered his second set of explosives, flipping the vehicle onto its side. Smoke filled the air as Jack approached the middle SUV, the most likely to contain his target. The door was jammed. He wrenched it open, gun ready. Empty. All 3 vehicles, empty. A burner phone he'd hidden in his gear chirped. Text message. Nice try, Sergeant Mitchell. Wrong convoy. She says hello. Attached was a photo of Grace, timestamp current, seated in an SUV passing a landmark Jack recognized. A location hours away from his carefully planned ambush. He'd been played. Jack's roar of frustration echoed across the empty highway. Dragovich had known, had fed him false intel, used his desperation against him. And now Grace was being moved to a location Jack had no way to track. Behind him, sirens wailed in the distance. No time to clean up, to hide his involvement. The carefully constructed cover he'd built was now worthless. As Jack disappeared into the woods, his mind was already shifting gears. Dragovich wanted to play games? Fine. But he'd forgotten the first rule of dealing with a Marine sniper. Never leave an enemy alive behind you. In the real convoy, now miles away, Grace felt the vehicle slow as it turned onto a private road. Through the tinted windows, she caught glimpses of dense forest. No buildings, no witnesses. Perfect isolation. Dragovich's phone chimed. He checked it, smiled, and showed Grace the screen, footage from traffic cameras showing the aftermath of Jack's ambush. Your husband is everything I'd hoped, he said smoothly. Skilled, determined, predictable. Grace met his gaze steadily. You don't know him at all. On the contrary, my dear. Dragovich's smile widened. I know him better than you imagine. And soon, he'll learn what happens when a simple Marine interferes with matters beyond his understanding. Grace said nothing, but inwardly she smiled. These men, with all their power and resources, had made the same mistake her most arrogant students often made. They assumed that because they were stronger, they were smarter. They had no idea what was coming for them. Back in the compound's basement, Nico lay on a cold concrete floor, his body aching from Korloff's attention. But his swollen lips curved in a slight smile. In the chaos of Grace's escape attempt and his subsequent punishment, no one had thought to check his cell phone. No one knew about the text he'd managed to send just before they caught him. A message to a number Grace had made him memorize, containing 3 critical pieces of information. the real convoy's destination, the name of Dragovich's government contact, and most importantly, the true reason Grace had been taken. Now all he could do was wait and hope Jack Mitchell was as good as Grace believed. Because if he wasn't, they were all dead anyway. Dawn painted the highway wreckage in shades of gold and shadow as Jack Mitchell methodically searched the destroyed convoy vehicles. His face was a mask of controlled fury, each movement precise despite his rage. Police would arrive soon, but he needed answers. The middle SUV's dashboard held a surprise, a tablet deliberately left behind. Jack's instinct screamed trap, but he had no choice. He activated it, and Viktor Dragovich's face filled the screen. Sergeant Mitchell. Dragovich's smile was razor-sharp. I trust by now you've realized your error. A skilled sniper should always verify his target, yes? He adjusted his immaculate tie. But then, verification was never your strong suit. Kosovo taught us that much. Jack's blood ran cold. Kosovo, a mission that had haunted his dreams for 6 years. You see, Jack. May I call you Jack? This isn't just about your charming wife. Though Grace is quite remarkable. Such spirit. Dragovich's eyes hardened. This is about debts. About justice. About a night in Kosovo when a certain Marine sniper took a shot he shouldn't have and changed many lives forever. The video continued, but Jack's mind was already spiraling back. Asterisk rain pounded against his position as Jack lay prone on that muddy hillside, scope trained on the compound below. The intel had been specific, a human trafficking operation, time-sensitive target. But something felt wrong. Sierra 1, confirmed target location. The voice in his earpiece belonged to Colonel Richard Daniels, theater commander. Sir, something's off, Jack reported. Guard patterns are wrong for traffickers. These men move like. You have confirmation of target? Daniels cut him off. Simple question, Sergeant. Affirmative, but... Then take the shot. That's an order. Jack squeezed the trigger. His target dropped. Then all hell broke loose. Not traffickers, but arms dealers. Professional military. 3 good Marines died in the ensuing firefight. Later, Daniels would call it unfortunate intel failure. But Jack had seen the look in the colonel's eyes. He'd known. The whole operation had been a setup, asterisk. The video continued. You remember Colonel Daniels, of course? Dragovich's smile widened. He sends his regards. In fact, he's been quite helpful in our current arrangement. The pieces clicked into place. Daniels. Now it made sense. The professional opposition, the leaked intel, the perfectly timed ambush. This went beyond the Russian mob. Your wife is comfortable, by the way, Dragovich continued. For now. How long she remains, so depends entirely on you. A shame if she were to suffer for your professional indiscretions. The video ended. Jack checked his watch. 15 minutes until law enforcement arrived. He retrieved what he needed from the wreckage and disappeared into the tree line, mind racing. Daniels. The name opened a flood of bitter memories. After Kosovo, the colonel had risen quickly through the ranks, his career seemingly accelerated by unnamed benefactors. Now he held a senior position in military intelligence, with access to classified operations, prototype weapons, and detailed files on former operators like Jack. But why work with Dragovich? What was the connection? Jack needed answers. He had one lead, Maxwell Weber, Dragovich's personal accountant. Every criminal empire needed its bookkeeper, and Weber knew where the money flowed. Finding him wasn't hard. The man was a creature of habit. The Pacific Heights Country Club was exclusive, secure, and thoroughly unprepared for a determined Marine. Jack waited in Weber's private steam room, letting the billowing vapor hide his presence. The accountant entered wrapped in a white towel, humming tunelessly. He didn't notice Jack until the door clicked shut behind him. Mr. Weber. Jack's voice was soft. Reasonable. We need to talk about Viktor Dragovich. Weber spun, face paling. How did you security? They're taking a break? Jack smiled without humor. Sit down. You're going to tell me everything about Dragovich's operation. Starting with his new compound. He'll kill me. I'll kill you faster. Jack let his expression show the truth of that statement. And unlike Dragovich, I'll make it quick. 20 minutes later, Jack had what he needed. Weber had folded quickly. Men like him always did when faced with immediate consequences rather than distant threats. The compound's location, security details, and most importantly, confirmation of Daniels' involvement. They're partners, Weber had babbled. Daniels provides military hardware, Dragovich handles distribution. Been going on for years, ever since some operation in Kosovo went wrong. Jack's burner phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. Need to talk. About Grace. About Daniels. Not safe. Meet tonight. Nico. The young guard Grace had mentioned in her failed escape attempt. It could be another trap, but Jack's instinct said otherwise. He sent back coordinates for a meeting. The abandoned warehouse district was perfect for clandestine meetings and ambushes. Jack set up 3 escape routes and 2 sniper positions before Nico arrived, looking nervous and beaten. Mrs. Mitchell trusted you, Nico said without preamble. Said you'd understand about Kosovo. Talk. Daniels is using Dragovich to move military hardware. Special weapons. But it's more than that. Nico glanced over his shoulder. The Kosovo mission, it wasn't just a setup. It was a test. Daniels needed to know how far you'd go, following orders. Why? Because he's building something. An operation that makes Dragovich look small-time. Private military contractors, corrupt officials, arms dealers, all connected. Kosovo was just the beginning. Jack's mind raced. And Grace? Bait. But also insurance. Daniels knows you have proof about Kosovo. Thinks you'll trade it for her safety. Nico handed over a phone. Compound blueprints. Guard rotations. But be careful, Dragovich knows you're coming. He's prepared. Why help us? Nico touched his bruised face. Because some debts have to be paid. Some wrongs have to be right. He turned to go, then paused. One more thing. Watch for the new security system. West Wing is rigged to blow. Jack spent the next 12 hours planning his infiltration. The compound was a fortress, 3 layers of security, motion sensors, armed patrols. But every fortress had weaknesses, if you knew where to look. At midnight, he made his move. The first 2 guards went down silently. Sleeper holds, no killing unless necessary. Jack moved like a ghost through the compound's shadows, avoiding patrols with practiced ease. The West Wing looked clear, but Nico's warning rang in his ears. Jack studied the corridor. There, subtle marks around the door frames. Primer cord, probably connected to a larger charge. He was about to retreat when voices approached. No choice. He had to move. Jack dove through a side door, just as 2 guards rounded the corner. The explosion came without warning. Heat and pressure slammed him against the wall as the charges detonated. Secondary explosions followed, the whole wing going up in a chain reaction. Jack rolled with the blast, letting his tactical gear absorb the worst. His ears rang as he scrambled through the smoke, staying low. Guards shouted in Russian, footsteps thundering above. He found a maintenance tunnel, dropping down into darkness as bullets sparked off the walls behind him. The tunnel led to a drainage system, then out to the woods beyond the compound. Safe for the moment, Jack examined what he'd managed to grab during his escape. A laptop files something about Project Avalanche. He opened the first file. His blood ran cold. Photos, documents, mission reports, all about him. About Kosovo. But not just Kosovo. Every operation he'd run. Every shot he'd taken. Surveillance photos spanning years. Detailed psychological profiles. And there, in the corner of each document, Colonel Richard Daniels' signature. This wasn't just about revenge. Daniels hadn't just set him up in Kosovo. He'd been watching, waiting, planning for years. Building an operation that would destroy him completely. But why? What could be worth this level of obsession? The answer lay in another file. A single photo that made Jack's heart stop. It showed a younger Daniel standing next to a man Jack recognized instantly. Viktor Dragovich's father, taken 2 days before Jack's shot in Kosovo had killed him. Everything clicked into place. The setup, the weapons deals, Grace's kidnapping, it was all connected. Daniels wasn't just working with Dragovich. He was using him. Using his desire for revenge to mask a much bigger operation. And Grace. Grace wasn't just bait for Jack. She was insurance, keeping him focused on her rescue instead of seeing the bigger picture. Jack's phone buzzed. Another message from Dragovich. Impressive escape, Sergeant. But how long can you protect everyone you care about? Your wife, your mother, your old Marine buddies. Tick-tock. Jack studied the message, his tactical mind already formulating plans. They thought they had him trapped, forced to choose between saving Grace and exposing their operation. They didn't understand what they'd really done. They hadn't trapped him. They'd freed him from all restraint. Because now Jack Mitchell, decorated Marine, skilled sniper, devoted husband, had nothing left to lose. And that made him the deadliest weapon of all. In her heavily guarded room at the new compound, Grace Mitchell smiled slightly as distant explosions lit up the night sky. She didn't need to see to know what was happening. Jack was coming, and God help anyone who stood in his way. Daniel sat in his Pentagon office, watching the compound security feeds. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. Mitchell would be desperate now, unfocused, ready to trade his silence about Kosovo for his wife's safety. Soon, Project Avalanche could proceed without fear of exposure. Soon, all the loose ends would be tied up. But as he reached for his whiskey, Daniel's hand trembled slightly. Because deep down, he remembered something crucial about Jack Mitchell, something that should have given him pause before starting this dangerous game. The deadliest predators were always the most patient. And Jack Mitchell hadn't survived this long by being predictable. The real war was just beginning. The neon sign of Eddie's Bar and Grill buzzed intermittently in the rain, casting alternating shadows across Jack Mitchell's face as he waited in the parking lot. His watch showed 2:37 a.m., the witching hour for retired Marines with too many memories and not enough peace. A motorcycle rumbled in the distance, growing louder until it pulled into the lot. The rider, built like a heavyweight boxer, killed the engine and removed his helmet. Miguel Torres hadn't changed much in 6 years. Same military short hair, same scar through his left eyebrow from a firefight in Fallujah. Only the lines around his eyes were new, carved by time and trouble. "You look like shit, Mitchell," Torres said by way of greeting. "You should see the other guys." Jack managed a grim smile. "Thanks for coming, Miguel. When you called..." Torres shook his head. "Kosovo? Daniels? Man, I thought that nightmare was buried." They headed inside. Eddie's was almost empty. A couple of truckers at the counter, an old-timer nursing a beer in the corner. Perfect for sensitive conversations. "Grace has been taken," Jack said once they were seated in a back booth. "Dragovich's crew. But Daniels is pulling the strings." Torres's face hardened. "The colonel? You're sure? Remember Johnson? Matthews? Garcia?" Jack's voice was quiet. They weren't supposed to die that night. The intel wasn't just bad, it was manufactured. Daniels set us up. Why now? After all these years? Jack slid across the file he'd recovered from the compound. Because what happened in Kosovo was just the beginning. Daniels has been building something bigger. Using Dragovich's organization to move military hardware, setting up an international arms pipeline. Grace was just bait to keep me distracted while they finished the setup. Torres studied the documents, his extensive experience in military intelligence showing in his quick analysis. These weapons shipments, they're not just going to typical buyers. These are precision strikes, designed to spark specific conflicts. Someone's playing puppet master. Can you track the money? Torres grinned wolfishly. "Brother, that's what I do now. Private security consulting is just a cover. I follow digital paper trails for 3-letter agencies." He pulled out a laptop. "Give me 2 hours." Those 2 hours turned into an all-night deep dive into the dark web of international finance. Torres's fingers flew across the keyboard, breaking through firewalls and encrypted accounts with practiced ease. "Got something," he announced as dawn began to break. "Daniels has been moving millions through shell companies. Weapons, mercenaries, bribes. Building an empire using Dragovich's connections as cover." He pointed to a series of transactions. But here's the interesting part. Regular payments to someone inside Dragovich's organization. "A mole." Jack leaned forward. "Can you trace it?" "Better." Torres grinned. "I can give you a schedule. Anton Petrov, Dragovich's lieutenant. He makes a weekly collection from a drop box in the financial district," which was how, 12 hours later, Anton Petrov found himself zip-tied to a chair in an abandoned warehouse, facing 2 very determined ex-Marines. "Your choice is simple," Jack explained calmly while Torres checked their perimeter. "Tell us where Grace Mitchell is being held, or find out exactly how much pain you can endure before talking anyway." Petrov spat on the floor. "Dragovich will kill me. Probably, Jack agreed. But I'll kill you slower. And I've had more practice. It took 20 minutes of creative persuasion before Petrov broke. The location, an old mining complex converted into a secure compound. Heavy security, automated defenses, at least 30 armed guards. The woman, she's in the East Wing, Petrov gasped. But you'll never reach her. Dragovich knows you're coming. He's ready. Meanwhile, at the compound, Dragovich was conducting his own investigation. Security footage showed Nico making a call from an unauthorized phone. The young guard's recent behavior had raised suspicions. Watch him, Dragovich ordered Korolov. If he makes contact with Mitchell or tries to warn the woman, kill him. But make it look like an accident. Korolov nodded, a predatory gleam in his eyes. He'd never liked Nico, too soft, too principled. This would be pleasure mixed with business. Jack and Torres spent the next day preparing their assault. They hit one of Dragovich's weapons convoys at dawn, using precisely placed charges to disable 3 trucks without casualties. The weapons, advanced prototype rifles and targeting systems, would come in handy. Just like old times, Torres grinned as they loaded their stolen gear. Remember that supply raid in Kandahar? Jack's expression darkened. Try not to get shot this time. Hey, that was one time. An alert pinged on Torres's phone, their surveillance system picking up movement. A message from Nico, encrypted, Grace confirmed in East Wing. Security doubled. Automated turrets installed on North Approach. Korolov watching me. Be careful. Torres whistled low. Kid's taking a big risk. He's a good man in a bad situation. Jack checked his weapons. Like we used to be. Used to be? Torres raised an eyebrow. Brother, we're about to assault a fortified compound to rescue a kidnapped woman from the Russian mob. Pretty sure we're still in bad situations. They spent the next hours planning their attack. Torres's military intelligence background proved invaluable. He identified blind spots in the security system, patrol patterns, communication protocols. We hit them at shift change, he explained, marking points on the blueprint. Their radio check-ins create a 3-minute window. I can loop their security feeds, make them see what we want. Jack nodded, but his mind wandered to another mission briefing, 6 years ago. Asterisk, the plan is solid, Captain Harris had assured them. Intel confirms minimal resistance. Quick in and out operation. Jack had studied the maps, something nagging at his instincts. Sir, these guard patterns, they're too professional for traffickers. Stick to the plan, Mitchell, Daniels had interrupted. You're a sniper, not an intelligence officer. 2 hours later, Johnson died in Jack's arms, bleeding out from an ambush they should have seen coming. Matthews and Garcia never made it out of the compound. Asterisk. Jack. Torres's voice snapped him back. You with me? Yeah. Jack forced the memories down. Yeah, I'm good. We don't have to do this alone, Torres said quietly. I know some people, former operators who owe me favors. No. Jack's voice was firm. I won't risk more lives. Not after. He let the sentence hang. Torres clasped his shoulder. What happened to them wasn't your fault. You tried to warn them. Doesn't bring them back. They worked through the night, checking and rechecking their gear. Jack field stripped and reassembled his rifle by touch, the ritual calming his mind. Torres monitored the compound's communications, building a pattern of guard rotations and security protocols. At midnight, Nico sent another message. Dragovich agitated. Something big happening tomorrow. Military contacts arriving. Grace being moved within 24 hours. Time's up, Jack said. We move now. The approach to the compound was textbook, silent, methodical, professional. Torres looped the security cameras while Jack neutralized the perimeter guards with non-lethal takedowns. Everything was going according to plan. According to plan. They reached the East Wing's access point without resistance. Torres worked on the electronic lock while Jack covered their 6. Something's wrong, Jack whispered. This is too easy. The lock clicked open. They stepped inside, and the lights blazed to life, revealing Viktor Dragovich standing with a dozen armed men. Beside him, Nico stood with his head bowed. Sergeant Mitchell. Dragovich smiled a sharp smile. Right on schedule. I'm sorry, Nico said softly. They have my sister. Torres moved for his weapon, but red dots from laser sights already danced across his chest. Please, Dragovich continued, don't do anything heroic. I would hate to send Grace your bodies as a wedding anniversary gift. Jack's mind raced, calculating angles, options, possibilities. But the truth was clear. They'd walked right into a trap. And somewhere in the Pentagon, Colonel Richard Daniels watched the security feed with satisfaction. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. The real game was about to begin. Time seemed to slow as Jack Mitchell processed the situation. 12 armed men, Dragovich smirking, Nico's betrayal, and Torres beside him with laser sights dancing across his chest. Years of combat experience condensed into a single thought. Create chaos. Now! Jack yelled, throwing a flashbang grenade he'd palmed earlier. Torres, reading his mind like in their Marine days, was already diving for cover. The explosion filled the room with light and sound. Jack's tactical visor, activated seconds before, protected him from the worst effects. He moved on pure muscle memory, taking down 2 guards before they could recover. Torres rolled behind a concrete pillar, already returning fire. Like Fallujah all over again, less talking, more shooting. Jack caught movement in his peripheral vision. Dragovich retreating through a side door, protected by a security detail. The firefight was intense, close-quarters combat at its most brutal. Jack took a bullet to his tactical vest, the impact like a sledgehammer to his ribs. Torres caught one in the shoulder but kept fighting. Through the chaos, Nico stood frozen, clearly torn between loyalty to Dragovich and his conscience. When a guard aimed at Jack's exposed back, Nico's hesitation vanished. He tackled the man, sending the shot wide. The woman. Nico shouted over the gunfire. East Wing, Sublevel 2. But Dragovich. A burst of automatic fire cut him off, forcing him to dive for cover. Jack and Torres used the distraction to break through the enemy line, fighting their way deeper into the compound. "You're hit," Torres grunted, noticing blood seeping through Jack's sleeve. "Flesh wound." Jack reloaded his weapon. "We need to split up. Find Grace. They'll be waiting for that." Torres's tactical mind was already working. "Dragovich will expect us to separate. Makes us easier targets." Before Jack could respond, heavy footsteps approached from both directions. They were being boxed in. "Remember Kandahar?" Torres grinned through the blood on his face. Jack's eyes widened. "No. Miguel, don't." "Only way, brother." Torres checked his magazines. "I'll give them something to chase. Find your wife." "Torres." "Hey." Torres gripped Jack's shoulder. "Some debts you never stopped paying. I owed you since Kosovo. Now we're even." Before Jack could argue, Torres burst from cover, firing in both directions. "Come on, you Russian bastards. Show me what you've got." Jack wanted to stop him, to find another way. But Torres was right. It was their only play. He used the distraction to slip away, Torres's covering fire, and war cries echoing through the corridors. 2 floors down, Grace Mitchell was discovering exactly how far Viktor Dragovich would go to break someone's spirit. The crime boss circled her chair, each step measured precise. "Your husband is here," he said conversationally, examining a selection of implements laid out on a steel table. "Fighting his way through my men as we speak. How many will die, I wonder, before he reaches us?" Grace kept her eyes forward, her teacher's discipline helping her maintain composure. "Jack will do what's necessary." But that's the question, isn't it?" Dragovich selected a pair of pliers. "What is necessary? How far will he go? How far will you go?" He held the pliers near her fingernail. "Shall we find out together?" What followed tested every ounce of Grace's resolve. Dragovich was skilled at his craft, knowing exactly how to cause maximum pain without leaving permanent damage. Through it all, Grace retreated into her mind, focusing on memories of Jack, of their life together. "Remarkable," Dragovich mused after several minutes. "Most break by now. Beg, plead. But you're different." "Go to hell," Grace managed through gritted teeth. An explosion rocked the building, followed by gunfire and screaming. Dragovich's phone buzzed. "Sir." A panicked voice. "Torres is cutting through our men like they're nothing. And Mitchell. We've lost track of Mitchell." Dragovich's face darkened. "Prepare the helicopter. We're moving ahead of schedule." He turned to Grace. "It seems our time together must be cut short. We have a long flight ahead." Above them, Torres was giving the performance of his life, and the last performance he'd ever give. He dropped his tactical approach, going full berserker. Each shot found its mark. Each movement calculated to draw attention away from wherever Jack was headed. "That all you got?" he shouted, blood running freely from multiple wounds. "My grandmother shoots better." He'd taken down 15 of Dragovich's men, but they kept coming. A bullet caught him in the leg, another in his side. Still, he advanced, becoming the thing their nightmares were made of, a Marine with nothing left to lose. When the final bullet hit him square in the chest, Torres was smiling. His last thought was of Jack, hoping his friend would make it count. Nico found Jack 2 corridors from Grace's location. "Mitchell, wait!" Jack nearly shot him on reflex. "Give me one reason." "Dragovich is moving her helicopter on the roof." "But it's a trap. She's not the real target anymore." Nico spoke quickly, urgently. "Daniels is here. Just arrived. This whole thing, it's bigger than we thought. Talk fast." "Dragovich plans to smuggle her out through his private airfield. But Daniels, he's using this to cover something else. Project Avalanche, it's not just weapons. They're staging a coup in 3 different countries, using the weapons as leverage." Jack's tactical mind raced. "Why tell me this now?" "Because they killed my sister anyway." Nico's eyes hardened. "They never intended to spare her. Just like they never intended to let your wife live." A series of explosions rocked the building. More of Torres's work. Jack checked his ammunition. "Can you get me to the roof?" "Better." Nico pulled out a keycard. "I can shut down their escape route. Emergency protocols. Lock down every exit except the main gate. Force them to ground transport." "Do it." Nico disappeared into a security room, while Jack moved toward Grace's location. He found signs of recent torture. Tools laid out, drops of blood. His vision went red with rage. Colonel Richard Daniels arrived at the compound in a black SUV, looking every inch the decorated military officer. His uniform was immaculate, his bearing rigid with authority. "Status," he barked at Korloff. "Mitchell's partner is dead. Mitchell himself is in the building, but contained. We're moving the woman now." "And Dragovich?" "Supervising the transfer personally." Daniels smiled coldly. "Perfect. Begin phase 2. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the compound. Emergency doors slammed shut, cutting off access to the roof. Dragovich's escape route was sealed. "What's happening?" Daniels demanded. "Security override." Korloff checked his tablet. "Someone's locked down the building." In the security room, Nico allowed himself a small smile as he initiated the protocols. His sister was dead, but he could still make things right. A guard found him moments later. The gunshot was quick, professional. But Nico died knowing he'd given Jack a fighting chance. Dragovich's final fallback position was a fortified mansion 20 miles from the compound. Jack infiltrated it 3 hours later, using intel from Nico's last transmission. The mansion was a killing ground of automated defenses and hidden traps. Jack disabled 3 separate alarm systems, avoided pressure plates, and neutralized for guard patrols before reaching the main house. Grace was there. He could feel it, but so were Dragovich and Daniels. The first trap nearly took his head off, a shotgun rigged to a door handle. The second was more subtle, poison needles in a false floor panel. Each step required total concentration. Jack found Grace in the mansion study, tied to a chair. Dragovich stood behind her, gun pressed to her head. But it was the other man in the room that drew Jack's attention. Colonel Richard Daniels smiled, looking exactly as he had in Kosovo 6 years ago. "Welcome home, Sergeant Mitchell. We've been expecting you." "Jack." Grace's voice was steady despite her injuries. "It's a trap." Daniels finished. "Of course it is. It always was." He gestured, and armed men emerged from hidden positions. "Everything since Kosovo has been building to this moment. Your wife, Dragovich, the weapons, all pieces on my chessboard." "Why?" Jack kept his weapon raised, mind calculating angles, possibilities. "Because you were the best, Mitchell. The perfect soldier. Until you started asking questions. Started thinking for yourself." Daniels paced slowly. "Kosovo proved you couldn't be controlled. Couldn't be trusted with what was coming. Project Avalanche," Jack said. "Ah, so you know? Did Nico tell you?" "Brave boy, but ultimately expendable. Like your friend Torres." Daniels smiled. Like everyone who gets in my way. You're insane. I'm a visionary. Kosovo was just the beginning. With Project Avalanche, we'll reshape the global order. Create chaos, then offer solutions. All we needed was someone to take the fall when the truth comes out. Daniel spread his arms. And who better than the decorated Marine who went rogue? The sniper who murdered his way through the Russian mob to save his wife? Jack's finger tightened on the trigger. You won't get away with this. I already have. Daniels nodded to someone behind Jack. Good night, Sergeant. The last thing Jack felt was the sting of a needle in his neck. As darkness took him, he saw Grace struggling against her bonds, screaming his name. Daniel stood over Jack's unconscious form, satisfaction evident in his bearing. Everything had gone exactly as planned. Almost everything. What he didn't see was Grace's hands, already partly free from their bonds, a skill Jack had taught her years ago. What he didn't know was that Torres, in his final moments, had managed to send a message to contacts from his intelligence days. And what none of them realized was that Jack Mitchell had planned for this very moment. Because a Marine sniper's greatest weapon wasn't his rifle. It was his ability to think 3 moves ahead. The real war was about to begin. Grace Mitchell sat in her new cell in Dragovich's mansion, her wrists raw from the restraints, but her mind sharp and focused. Nico's last words to her echoed in her memory. Remember the guard rotations. Remember their patterns. Everyone has habits. Even professionals. She'd been watching, learning, just as Jack had taught her. The night guard, Pavel, always checked his phone at 2 a.m., standing in the same spot where the Wi-Fi signal was strongest. The morning guard, Stefan, had a bad knee that slowed him on the stairs. Every detail, every weakness, carefully filed away. But it was Nico's final gift that gave her hope. A small metal shiv slipped to her during the chaos of the transfer. Sometimes, he'd whispered, the simplest solutions are best. Now, as midnight approached, Grace worked methodically at her restraints. Years of grading papers had given her fingers surprising strength and dexterity. The cuffs were tight, but not tight enough. Click. The sound was barely audible, but to Grace it might as well have been thunder. One hand free, then the other. She looked at her bruised wrists, remembering Jack's training sessions in their backyard. It's not about strength, he'd told her. It's about leverage, timing, using their expectations against them. Pavel's footsteps approached, right on schedule. Grace positioned herself behind the door, heart pounding but hands steady. This was no different from controlling a classroom of rowdy teenagers, she told herself, just with higher stakes. The door opened. Pavel stepped in, phone already in hand, expecting to see her sleeping. Grace struck, a precise hit to the throat, just as Jack had shown her. Pavel dropped the phone, gasping. Before he could recover, she grabbed his sidearm and brought it down hard on his temple. Sorry about that, Grace whispered as she dragged him inside. But you really should pay more attention during work hours. She took his phone, gun, and keycard. The phone was locked, but Grace had watched Pavel enter his code enough times. 4589. Simple. Predictable. Just like Nico had said. The messaging app was still open. Grace's fingers flew across the keyboard, composing a text to the last number Pavel had contacted. A burner phone she prayed Jack still had. East Wing. 3rd floor. 4 guards. Daniels in study with D, moving soon. Send. Now came the hard part. Grace checked the gun, full magazine, one in the chamber. She'd never fired anything bigger than Jack's practice pistol at the range, but the principles were the same. Point, squeeze, follow through. The corridor outside was dimly lit, security lights casting long shadows. Grace moved like a ghost, remembering Jack's lessons about staying low, using cover. The mansion's layout was complex, but she'd memorized what she could see from her window. 3 floors up, Jack Mitchell was already fighting his way through Dragovich's security. The tranquilizer they'd used hadn't worked as well as planned. His Marine training had built up resistance to most sedatives. He'd woken up in a storage room, killed 2 guards with his bare hands, and reclaimed his weapons. Now he moved with deadly purpose, each shot precise, each movement economical. Grace's text had given him a target, and nothing would stop him from reaching it. Sir, a guard's panicked voice crackled over the radio. The woman, she's escaped. Lower level, East Wing. Jack allowed himself a small smile. That's my girl. Grace heard the alarm spread through the mansion. She needed to move faster. The study where Daniels and Dragovich planned their operations was 2 corridors away. If she could reach it, maybe find evidence of Project Avalanche. A guard rounded the corner. Grace didn't hesitate. 2 shots, center mass, just like at the range. The guard went down. The sound would draw others, but she was already moving. More shots echoed from above. Jack, fighting his way down. Grace quickened her pace. Almost there. She reached the study door just as it opened. Viktor Dragovich stood framed in the doorway, his cold eyes widening slightly at the sight of her. Mrs. Mitchell. His voice was smooth as ever, even with her gun pointed at his chest. I must say, I'm impressed. Don't move. Grace's voice was steady, her grip firm. Hands where I can see them. Of course. Dragovich raised his hands slowly. But tell me, can you do it? Can you actually pull that trigger? You're a teacher, not a killer. Grace's finger tightened on the trigger. She thought of Torres, who died helping Jack. Of Nico, who'd paid the ultimate price for choosing right over loyalty. That moment of hesitation was all Dragovich needed. He moved with surprising speed for his age, knocking the gun aside. Grace fought back, a knee to the groin, an elbow strike, but Dragovich was too strong, too experienced. He slammed her against the wall, hand at her throat. Brave, he growled, but foolish. Now, let's wait for your husband to. The window behind them exploded inward as Jack Mitchell crashed through, having rappelled from the floor above. His boot caught Dragovich in the side, sending him staggering away from Grace. Grace! Jack tossed her a spare weapon while drawing his own. You okay? Better now. She caught the gun smoothly, falling into a firing stance beside him. Colonel Daniels? Here. Daniels emerged from the study, his own weapon trained on them. Though I'm afraid I can't stay for the reunion. He backed toward a concealed door. Dragovich, finish this. I have a plane to catch. As Daniels turned to flee, Grace palm pressed something small against his jacket. A tracking device she'd taken from Pavel's equipment belt. The colonel never noticed, too focused on escape. Dragovich charged, firing. Jack and Grace dove in opposite directions, their Marine range practice paying off as they returned fire in perfect sync. But Dragovich was wearing body armor. Their shots had little effect. Grace, go! Jack shouted, engaging Dragovich hand-to-hand. Follow Daniels. Not without you. Their moment of distraction cost them. Dragovich landed a brutal strike that sent Jack reeling. Grace fired again, forcing Dragovich back, giving Jack time to recover. The fight that followed was savage. Jack matched Dragovich's experience with Marine combat training, but the crime boss was stronger, fueled by rage and desperation. They crashed through furniture, neither able to gain a clear advantage. Grace provided covering fire when she could, but the 2 men were too close, moving too fast for a clear shot. She heard reinforcements approaching. They were running out of time. Suddenly, Nico burst into the room, firing at his former boss. Go. I'll hold them off. Nico. Grace's eyes widened. We thought you were dead. Not yet. Nico's smile was grim as he took up a defensive position. But today's a good day for it. Go, finish this. Jack finally found his opening. As Dragovich lunged, Jack used the bigger man's momentum against him. A precise strike to the knee, an elbow to the jaw, and Dragovich stumbled. The crime boss pulled a knife, slashing viciously. Jack caught his wrist, turned, and applied pressure. Bones cracked. The knife fell. This is for Torres, Jack growled, delivering a devastating combination of strikes. For Nico's sister. Another hit. For everyone you've hurt. The final blow knocked Dragovich unconscious. Jack zip-tied him securely, then turned to Grace. We need to move. Daniels. I tagged him, Grace said quickly. Tracker on his jacket. But Nico. Gunfire erupted from the hallway. Nico was engaging Dragovich's reinforcements, buying them time with his life. Go. Nico shouted between bursts of fire. I've got this. Jack and Grace shared a look, then moved. They fought their way through the mansion together, their movements synchronized from years of practice. Grace might not be a Marine, but she was a quick study, and right now, she was just as deadly. They reached the garage just in time to see Daniel's car speeding away. Jack hotwired a vehicle while Grace checked the tracker signal on Pavel's phone. He's heading east, she reported. Probably toward his private airfield. We'll find him. Jack gunned the engine. He won't escape justice this time. Behind them, the sound of gunfire gradually faded. Nico made his last stand count, taking down 12 of Dragovich's men before a lucky shot finally found him. He died as he'd lived, trying to make right what had gone wrong. In the passenger seat, Grace checked their ammunition. Project Avalanche. We have to stop it. We will. Jack's voice was iron. But Daniels is just a part of it. There's something bigger. Then we'll find that too. Grace's hand found his. Together, they drove into the night, leaving behind the mansion and its secrets. Dragovich was defeated, but Daniels was still out there. And with him, the truth about Project Avalanche, a truth that could shake nations. The war wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. In his fleeing vehicle, Colonel Richard Daniels made a call. Implementation ahead of schedule. Commence Operation Whirlwind. And find that tracking device. I know they tagged me somehow. But by then, the signal had already been transmitted. Coordinates logged. A trail left for those who knew where to look. The next move in this deadly game would be Jack and Grace's. And this time, they'd be ready. Meanwhile, in a secure military facility, computers hummed to life. Project Avalanche entered its final phase. Across 3 continents, carefully placed weapons began moving toward their targets. The clock was ticking, and somewhere in the darkness, a Marine and his teacher wife were coming to stop it. Daniel smiled as his car ate up the miles. Let them come. They had no idea what they were really dealing with. Project Avalanche wasn't just about weapons or power. It was about changing the world. And no one, not even the Marine Corps' deadliest sniper and his surprisingly resourceful wife, would be allowed to stand in its way. The game was changing. The stakes were rising. And the real war was just beginning. Dawn broke over a rundown motel on the outskirts of Washington, D.C., painting the sky in shades of steel gray that matched Jack Mitchell's mood. He and Grace had spent the night planning, surrounded by laptops, documents, and weapons, the tools of their trade, old and new. Torres's intelligence contacts came through, Grace said, sorting through encrypted files recovered from Dragovich's compound. Her fingers flew across the keyboard with teacher's precision. Daniels has been busy. Look at this. Jack leaned over her shoulder. Multiple alerts flashed across the screen. FBI bulletins, CIA advisories, military dispatches. All painting him as a dangerous rogue operative who'd snapped under pressure. They're saying you killed Torres. Grace's voice tightened with anger. That you're working with Russian organized crime. Daniels is thorough, Jack admitted. He's using federal resources to box us in. Soon every law enforcement agency in the country will be looking for us. Then we'd better work fast. Grace pulled up another file. These were in Dragovich's system, heavily encrypted. But look at the file structure. It's familiar. Jack studied the pattern. Standard military protocol. Like what we used in Kosovo. Exactly. Grace's eyes lit up with the same excitement she got solving literary puzzles with her students. Daniels used military encryption on mob files. Sloppy. And if I cross-reference this with the teaching patterns we use for student code breaking. Her fingers danced across the keys, applying educational algorithms to military ciphers. Slowly, the files began to unlock. Got you, she whispered. Jack's burner phone buzzed. A contact from his Marine days, now working in military intelligence. Mitchell, you there? You need to move. Daniels just authorized a federal task force. They're painting you as terrorist threat. Understood? Jack's mind raced. Need a favor. I'm sending you files. Proof of Daniel's corruption. Project Avalanche, weapons deals, everything. Make it public. That's career suicide. People died for this truth. Make it count. Within hours, the files hit the internet. Carefully selected journalists received anonymous packages. Social media exploded with revelations about Project Avalanche, Daniel's corruption, and the true events in Kosovo. In his Pentagon office, Colonel Richard Daniels watched his carefully constructed world unravel. His phone hadn't stopped ringing, media inquiries, internal affairs, congressional oversight committees. Sir? His aide looked nervous. FBI is here with a warrant. Daniels smiled thinly. Tell them I'll be right out. As soon as the aide left, he triggered his escape protocol. A hidden elevator, a tunnel to a secure garage, and within minutes he was gone. But Jack and Grace were waiting. The chase through downtown D.C. was something out of an action movie. Daniels had a head start and a powerful car, but Jack had learned urban pursuit in Fallujah's streets. He anticipated Daniels' moves, taking shortcuts while Grace coordinated with traffic cameras from her laptop. He's heading for the river, Grace reported. Wait. Incoming vehicles. Multiple hostiles. Dragovich's remaining forces had joined the game. 3 black SUVs converged on their position, professional hitmen leaning out windows with automatic weapons. Hold on. Jack swerved as bullets sparked off their armored car. Grace returned fire with precise shots, her time at the shooting range paying off. Just like date night, she called over the gunfire. Jack grinned despite the situation. You have a strange idea of romance. They split up the pursuit, Jack keeping pace with Daniels while Grace used traffic patterns to trap the Russian mobsters. She coordinated with traffic control systems, timing lights to create chaos for their pursuers. One SUV crashed into a delivery truck. Another spun out trying to avoid her roadblock. The third broke off pursuit as police sirens approached. That's for Torres, Grace muttered, watching the wreckage in their rearview mirror. Meanwhile, she worked on Dragovich's files between maneuvers. The encryption was complex, but Grace had spent 15 years teaching teenagers to unravel Shakespeare's hidden meanings. This was just another puzzle. Jack! She suddenly sat up straighter. I found it. Daniel's safe house. It's an old NSA facility, decommissioned after the Cold War. Underground bunker, completely off the grid. He's heading there now, Jack realized. Can we beat him? Grace's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up city maps and construction records. Service tunnel entrance here, parallel to his route. We can cut him off. They set their trap in the tunnel, Jack using his Marine training to identify choke points while Grace coordinated with the facility's ancient security systems. When Daniels arrived, he'd find every escape route blocked. The colonel's car screeched into the tunnel right on schedule. Jack's precise shots took out his tires, sending the vehicle spinning. Daniels emerged shooting, his own military training evident in every move. It's over, Daniels. Jack called from cover. The files are public. Everyone knows about Project Avalanche. You think that matters? Daniels' laugh echoed off concrete walls. Project Avalanche was just the beginning. Do you have any idea what's really at stake? Enlighten me. Kosovo wasn't a mistake. It was a test. We needed to know who would follow orders without question. Who could be trusted when the real work began? Daniel's voice dripped contempt. But you couldn't just follow orders, could you, Mitchell? Had to ask questions. Had to play hero. You killed my men. I created opportunities. Do you think global power shifts happen by accident? Sometimes the old order needs to burn before a new one can rise. You're insane. I'm a visionary. Everything I've done, the weapons, the staged conflicts, even taking your precious wife, it was all building towards something greater. Daniels was shouting now. A new world order, built on controlled chaos. And you could have been part of it. The firefight that followed was intense. Both men using every trick learned in decades of military service. They traded shots and positions, neither able to gain advantage. Then Grace's voice came over Jack's radio. Security systems accessed. Ready on your mark. Jack smiled. Sometimes the best military strategy came from a teacher's planning. Now, the tunnel's ancient ventilation system roared to life, filling the space with smoke and steam. Emergency lights strobed, creating disorienting patterns in the artificial fog. Jack moved by instinct and training, knowing Daniels would be struggling with the chaos. The colonel had spent years behind a desk. Jack had lived this kind of combat. They crashed together in the smoke, rifle shots giving way to brutal hand-to-hand combat. Daniels was stronger than he looked, his strikes fueled by desperation and rage. I made you, he snarled, landing a punch that sent Jack staggering. Everything you are came from my training. Wrong. Jack absorbed another hit, countering with a precise strike. Everything I am came from here. He touched his heart. From Grace. From the men who died trusting me. The fight became personal. Every technique they'd learned as Marines turned against each other. Daniels had the advantage of reach and weight, but Jack had something stronger driving him. Love, honor, redemption. For Torres, who died saving his friend. For Nico, who chose right over easy. For the men lost in Kosovo. For Grace, who'd shown more courage than any soldier. Daniels never saw the final combination coming. A strike to the kidney, an elbow to the jaw, and a sweeping leg takedown that left him gasping on the concrete. It's done, Jack said quietly, zip-tying the colonel's hands. No more schemes. No more wars for profit. Grace emerged from her position, weapon trained professionally on Daniels. Security footage and confessions uploaded to every major news outlet. It's over. Daniels looked up at them, blood trickling from his mouth. You have no idea what you've done. There are others, bigger players. Then we'll find them too, Grace said firmly. Together. Sirens approached, real federal agents this time, drawn by Grace's carefully leaked information. Soon the tunnel was swarming with FBI, military police, and intelligence officers. Jack and Grace watched as Daniels was led away, his careful plans and grand schemes reduced to nothing. Project Avalanche was exposed, its weapons shipments intercepted, its conspirators arrested. Think it's really over? Grace asked softly. Jack pulled her close, remembering the long journey that had brought them here. From a simple kidnapping to an international conspiracy. From a Marine and a teacher to something more, partners in every sense. This part is, he said. But Daniels was right about one thing. There are bigger players out there. People who profit from chaos and pain. Grace smiled, that same determined look she got when facing a challenging class. Then I guess we'll have to teach them a lesson. Jack laughed. Some might find it strange. A Marine sniper and a high school English teacher, standing against the darkness together. But they'd learned something powerful during this ordeal. Sometimes the strongest weapons weren't guns or tactics or military training. Sometimes they were love, trust, and the simple courage to stand up for what's right. As they walked away from the tunnel, hand in hand, both knew their lives would never be the same. But they were ready for whatever came next. After all, they had something their enemies would never understand. Each other. And that made them unstoppable. The federal courthouse buzzed with tension as Colonel Richard Daniels was led in, shackled, and wearing prison orange instead of his decorated uniform. Jack Mitchell watched from the gallery, Grace's hand steady in his, as they observed the man who had nearly destroyed their lives. The United States versus Colonel Richard Daniels, the judge announced. Multiple counts of conspiracy, weapons trafficking, and terrorism charges. Daniels stood straight-backed, ever the military man, but his eyes held a hint of fear. He glanced at Jack, perhaps expecting, maybe even hoping for, a bullet. It would have been easier than facing what was coming. Your Honor, the prosecutor began, the state presents evidence recovered by Mrs. Grace Mitchell, detailing Colonel Daniels' involvement in Project Avalanche and associated criminal enterprises. Grace had spent weeks organizing the evidence, applying her teacher's analytical skills to create an airtight case. Financial records, encrypted communications, weapons manifests. Everything needed to dismantle not just Daniels' operation, but Viktor Dragovich's entire criminal empire. When Daniels finally spoke, his voice was hollow. I did what was necessary. For the greater good. The greater good? Grace stood, her voice carrying through the courtroom. Tell that to Torres's family. To Nico's sister. To the men who died in Kosovo trusting you. Jack placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, but let her continue. This was her moment too. Teacher turned warrior, finding her voice. You had a choice, she told Daniels. We all have choices. And you chose wrong. The evidence was overwhelming. Daniels was sentenced to life without parole, his crimes too numerous for anything less. As they led him away, Jack caught his eye one last time. I could have killed you, Jack said quietly. Remember that. Every day in your cell, remember that I chose justice over vengeance. The case against Dragovich's organization was equally devastating. Grace's meticulous documentation, combined with Jack's tactical knowledge, gave federal authorities everything they needed. Safe houses were raided, assets frozen, operations dismantled. Special Agent Sarachin approached them after the sentencing. The Bureau wants to thank you both. This goes way beyond taking down a mob boss. You've exposed corruption at the highest levels. What happens now? Grace asked. Officially, you should lay low. Dragovich had connections we haven't uncovered yet. People who might seek revenge. Chin handed them a card. Unofficially, call me if you need anything. The FBI takes care of its friends. Their next stop was harder, visiting Nico's family. His mother lived in a small apartment in Brighton Beach, photos of her children covering every wall. The one of Nico in his security guard uniform held pride of place. He was a good boy, Mrs. Petrov said in heavily accented English. Always trying to do right thing. He saved our lives, Grace told her, holding the elderly woman's hands. He died a hero. Jack presented her with documents. Witness protection paperwork, financial arrangements, a new life away from Dragovich's shadow. Your son's courage won't be forgotten. You'll be taken care of, I promise. Mrs. Petrov kissed their cheeks, tears in her eyes. Nicholas would be proud. He talked about you both. The Marine who showed him honor, the teacher who showed him kindness. The drive home was quiet, both lost in thought. Their house seemed smaller somehow, changed by their absence. Or maybe they were the ones who had changed. Grace paused in her classroom doorway. Student essays still waited on her desk, exactly where she'd left them that fateful day. Seems like another lifetime. We can move, Jack offered. Start fresh somewhere else. No. Grace straightened her shoulders. This is our home, and I'm not done teaching yet. She smiled. Just maybe teaching something different now. Over the next few months, Grace began speaking at support groups for families affected by organized crime. Her story, the teacher who helped bring down a criminal empire, resonated with those seeking hope and justice. It's not about being fearless, she told them. It's about being brave enough to face your fears, to stand up when it matters. Jack watched her presentations with pride, seeing how she transformed her trauma into strength for others. But while Grace built her new calling, trouble was brewing elsewhere. The message came through one of Jack's old Marine channels, Captain Marcus Rivera, a teammate from his sniper unit. Simple text: we need to talk. Kosovo wasn't the only op Daniels corrupted. Jack stared at his phone, feeling the familiar pull of duty. Rivera was solid. If he was worried, something big was happening. You're thinking about it, aren't you? Grace didn't need to see the message to know. She knew her husband. Rivera wouldn't reach out without reason. Jack showed her the text. There might be others like Daniels out there. People who betrayed everything we fought for. Grace considered this, teacher's mind analyzing possibilities. What do you want to do? Honestly, part of me wants to stay here, live quietly, teach at the range. Jack ran a hand through his hair. But if there are more corrupt officers out there, using soldiers like pawns, then they need to be stopped? Grace nodded. So we stopped them. We? You really think I'm letting you do this alone? She raised an eyebrow. I didn't spend all that time learning combat skills just to go back to grading papers. Jack couldn't help but smile. This was the woman he'd fallen in love with, brilliant, determined, unstoppable when she set her mind to something. But darkness was gathering elsewhere. In a private hospital room in Moscow, Viktor Dragovich was recovering. His empire shattered, but his will unbroken. His loyal lieutenant, Korlov, stood at attention. The American thinks he's won, Dragovich growled. But he forgets, we Russians know about long winters. About patience. He handed Korlov a file. Begin rebuilding. Quietly. When the time comes, the Mitchell family will learn that some debts can never be paid in full. Korlov nodded grimly. It will take time. Resources. We have both. And we have something else now. Knowledge of our enemy. Dragovich's cold smile returned. The Marine's weakness is his wife. And the wife's weakness is her students. Remember that. The pieces were already moving. Sleeper agents activated. Accounts unfrozen. Networks reconstructed. The game wasn't over. It was merely entering a new phase. But for now, in the peaceful pre-dawn hours, Jack and Grace sat on their back porch, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of promise. Steam rose from their coffee cups as they enjoyed a moment of calm in the storm. Do you regret it? Jack asked softly. Getting pulled into my world? Grace considered the question, remembering the terrified teacher she'd been, now transformed into something stronger. Do you regret teaching me to fight? Never. Then there's your answer. She squeezed his hand. Besides, it's not your world anymore. It's ours. Whatever comes next, we face it together. Jack looked at their intertwined fingers, marveling at how this remarkable woman had not only survived his dangerous world, but had made it better, stronger, more human. The sun crested the horizon, golden light washing away the shadows. Soon they would face new challenges. Rivera's warning, Dragovich's revenge, the endless fight against corruption and evil. But for now, they had this moment, this peace, this unshakable certainty that whatever storms were gathering, they would weather them together. Because that's what they had become, more than marine and teacher, more than warrior and survivor. They were partners in the truest sense, each making the other stronger, better, more complete. Grace's phone buzzed, another support group asking her to speak. Jack's laptop blinked with an encrypted message from Rivera. The world was calling, duty and purpose intertwined. They shared a look, no words needed. They were ready. Let Dragovich plot his revenge. Let corrupt officers hide in shadows. Let the next storm come. The Marine and his teacher wife would be waiting, standing together against the darkness. Because they had learned the greatest lesson of all. Love wasn't a weakness to be exploited. It was armor, strength, the thing that let you stand when everything else fell. And nothing, not mob bosses, not corrupt officers, not all the armies of hell, could stand against that kind of power. The sun climbed higher, burning away the morning mist. Somewhere in the house, Grace's lesson plans waited. Jack's weapons needed cleaning. Life went on, but they were different now. Stronger, ready. And whatever came next, they would face it the way they had faced everything else. Together. Always together. The end. But perhaps only the beginning. What would you do if someone threatened your world? How far would you go to protect the ones you love? If you enjoyed this story of love, loyalty, and redemption, make sure to like and subscribe. There are more thrilling tales waiting to be told, where ordinary people find extraordinary courage in the face of impossible odds. Join us next time as we explore another story of heroism, sacrifice, and the indomitable human spirit.